Hello, friends. Thanks for joining. This is lecture topic 3, and in this lecture, we are going to be giving a top-level overview of the components of a financial plan. By way of context, the different components that we identify today, those will form the modules or the units that make up this class. So again, what we cover in individual units moving forward, in individual lectures moving forward, will ultimately tie back in to these pieces. Second, this is really important because, as you recall from the syllabus, about 12% of your final grade will be tied to the financial plan that you prepare and submit to me. So again, that's what we're at. Our topic today: a financial plan, what's it made of? And I would offer to you, and different people will break it up in different ways. Again, don't get hung up on those micro details. Look at the big picture. But I would offer to you, my friends, that a complete financial plan, it contains financial decisions to help you reach financial goals, but that's typically tied to 8 important categories. So I'm going to break down each of those categories and give a brief overview of what that category means. Your big task for this lecture: number 1, understand each of those 8 categories, know the definitions, get the broad idea. But critically, number 2, start thinking about how those individual pieces tie together. Here's a hint for you. It's all about cash and cash flow, because that's going to dictate your ability to satisfy all the different parts of these plans, okay? So again, learn what each part is, know the definitions, know the basics, but evolve your thinking, raise your thinking, go from the ground level or the bird's eye level and start to think and understand how the different elements of the plan tie together. The first part number 1, component number 1, category number 1 is budget planning, AKA budgeting. And while this is oftentimes the most hated part of the process, especially for students who come in and just want to learn how to invest in stocks so they can be rich tomorrow, it's the most critical of the components. Budget planning is the most critical because at the end of it all, your budget and spending decisions will dictate your net cash flow in a given period. And your net cash flow in turn will either enable, if you did it well, or constrain, if you didn't, all the other parts of your plan. Cash is king, and it's your budget planning component, AKA writing and sticking to a budget, that enables you to generate the net cash positive that you need. This is the most critical step. Budget planning, if you want to get a formal definition, is the process of forecasting and planning your future cash inflows, in other words, your future income, and your future cash outflows, your expenses. So budget planning is simply a process of forecasting and planning expected income in and expected money out. In other words, budget planning requires that you decide and think ahead and plan how you spend money, how much you will spend, and critically, how much you will save, okay? Note that budget planning is critical. It also evolves over time in the sense that your budget is influenced by different things, including your income. So in part, your budget plans and your ongoing budgeting will be affected by your education choices. They'll be affected by your career choices. And your budget planning will also be influenced by your life cycle phase, because obviously both the amount and nature of your income as well as your obligations for expenditure will change as you evolve on your own individual life cycle phase, okay? So part one, budget planning. The second part, tax planning. The reality is that number one, tax codes are increasingly complex. I prepare taxes. I have my IRS, licenses. It gets tougher and tougher to understand it every year. Thank God for tax software. And most critically, for many of you, your tax burden, meaning the percentage or the amount that you're effectively paying. And again, I like to consider taxes in a cash flow statement as an expenditure. Some people will always start with their net income. I like to start with my gross because I consider my taxes to be an expense. I pay rent to my landlord, I pay phone bill to Mr. AT&T, and I pay taxes to Mr. Government. So I consider it an expense. And when you see it in that light, for many of you, outside of your house, so your house excluded because the house is a big purchase. For the majority of you, your tax burden will be the biggest outlay that you face. That means that the biggest proportion of your spending that you make in your lifetime will not be to your education, will not be to your children, will not be to a car, it will be to Uncle Sam, okay? And therefore, as a result, you want to do good, smart, prudent tax planning. That is going to consider at its core decisions on how you can legally defer and or minimize your tax liability. This is a process that we call tax avoidance. Sorry. Yeah, that's right. We want to go through tax avoidance, which is legal. It is using current tax law to pay your required amount to Uncle Sam, but not $1 more. Please note, I am not, nor will I ever advocate for tax evasion. That is bad. If you want to go to prison and live off the government for a few years while eating 3 meals a day, by all means do it. But that's not legal. It's not condoned. You don't do it. But while tax evasion is illegal and bad, tax avoidance, meaning taking advantage of all the different laws and loopholes that are legally allowed to you to defer and minimize your tax liability, that's just a part of prudent planning. Because every dollar that you don't pay to the government in taxes legally is a dollar that you have left over for your immediate self and your future you. Another component in the financial plan is your liquidity management plan. Liquidity management. Liquidity is defined as your access to funds to cover your short-term, some people would even say your daily cash needs, okay? So liquidity refers to your access to funds. One way to consider this before I go into the details is imagine a person who has $1 million in the bank in cash and no other assets. Now imagine that person goes and buys a $1 million home for cash. Note that that person's net worth hasn't changed. Note that that person's asset base hasn't changed. $1 million before, $1 million after. Know that that person's liquidity is now fried. Because when you have $1 million in cash, you are totally liquid, which means that you have access to sufficient funds to cover your cash needs. The minute that that person bought that house for $1 million cash, they have no more liquidity. It's gone. And therefore, they're going to struggle to buy lunch today, let alone pay their property tax in 6 months. So liquidity is a unique subset of your total asset base, and it reflects the idea of your ability to handle short-term cash expenditures and needs, okay? Liquidity management includes, actually, I'll get to it in a bit, but liquidity management is defined formally as a plan for covering daily expenses, which we just hinted at. But I would also say that liquidity management should be considered, or a part of that should also include a plan for automating and handling your bills and payments. So I also wrap in the smart use of automation and technology and having the right tools for the job into liquidity management. Because ultimately your daily expenses is not just your money coming in that's liquid, what it's your daily bill pay, your monthly bill pay, paying that credit card, paying whatever you have to pay, okay? So liquidity management, it's a plan for how you cover daily expenses as well as how you automate and handle your bills and payments. We can say that liquidity management includes money management, which we would call cash management, as well as credit management. Because if you think about it from a broad lens, you can cover your daily needs, your daily cash, meaning spending requirements, either through actual cash, Mr. George Washington, or through Mr. Visa. Okay, so both cash management and credit management are subsets of liquidity management. Money management here, aka cash management, again, it's about decisions. Money management or cash management, it's the decisions that you make regarding how much to hold in liquid form as opposed to investing, as well as how to allocate those liquid funds among different short-term investment options. Note that while many people think of investments as stocks and bonds and long-term things, and that's correct. In this context, we're considering any place where you can hold your cash to be an investment option, because you do have options. You can put all your cash in a checking account, in a savings account, in a money market account. There's different options. Since those different options have different risks and rewards and benefits and costs, we'll consider them alternative investment options for short-term money. But the bigger picture here is your money management, your cash management decisions include, number one, how much of your money to keep liquid. Number two, how to allocate it and where you put it, okay? Credit management is defined as decisions that you'll make regarding how much credit to obtain in order to finance your spending. Note that when you look at money management and liquidity management, you are ultimately making decisions and facing trade-offs. Among the biggest decisions are, how much cash do you keep in liquid form? Because think about the benefit and cost trade-off. The benefit is you have liquidity and you can handle unexpected daily, monthly expenses. But the trade-off is, especially given today's, damn near zero interest rates on short-term savings, every dollar that you opt to keep liquid in a checking or savings account, for example, is going to earn you damn near no interest, as opposed to if you had put that money in an S&P 500 fund or, in a stock market fund, and that money could have grown. So there's a decision and there's a benefit and cost, okay? Your job when you make your liquidity decisions is to be thinking about that risk, reward, benefit, cost trade-off, okay? Another part of your financial plan is your technical financing plan. Finance is basically a broad term for the use of money over time. In this context, financing refers to how you're going to pay for, primarily by borrowing for large purchases, okay? So the next part of your financial plan is a plan for financing large purchases. And you'll usually handle that by taking out loans, because most large purchases, a car, for sure a house, things like that, you probably won't be able to pay in cash. So you have to have, if you want to invest in that asset or buy that asset, you're going to have a little bit of liquidity, but also access to finance and credit. Okay. Managing loans, once again, is a series of decisions. Those decisions include the following. You have to make loan decisions about, how much you can actually afford to borrow, how much you actually will borrow. Note that I make those separate. A lot of people get in trouble when they let lenders tell them, oh, we're going to give you this potential borrowing cap, and they think that they should just take that full amount. Knowing how much you can afford to borrow and how much you're going to actually borrow are separate but related decisions, okay? So you have to know how much you can afford to borrow, how much to actually borrow. You're going to want to ask about the maturity, that's the timeline, and the interest rates for that loan. And finally, you're going to want to make your decisions always factoring in the trade-offs that you'll face when you take on debt. If you decide that you can't live without that new Tesla, even though you don't really have a real salary, and you take on a 6-year car loan, God forbid, what are the trade-offs of that? If you go and buy your first home and you take out a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, what are the trade-offs there? Sure, you're going to be hopefully growing value as your house grows in fair market value. That adds to your wealth base. But what's the trade-off? If you have to make a mortgage payment every month of $3,000, what is the opportunity cost of that $3,000? What other things could that money have done? Okay. The next part of a comprehensive financial plan is insurance planning, AKA risk management. Insurance planning protects your assets. It protects your income, and ultimately it helps you to mitigate risk. Insurance planning is an essential part of prudent financial plans because you don't want to work hard to acquire something, including your own education and earning potential, and then see it somehow through the vagaries of risk in an uncertain world go away, be destroyed, etc. So insurance planning is going to protect your assets, including physical assets and yourself, protect your income, and help mitigate risk. Insurance decisions, which will be in your plan, will include analyzing the risks that you face. That's a really important way to look at it. You have to start looking at yourself and your environment. What are the risks that you face? You have to have an open mind, what they call soft eyes, to be able to see the big picture of your personal fiscal landscape and identify those risks. Once you identify the risks, then you have to decide on the types and the amounts of the insurance that you'll need. Note that once again, these decisions have trade-offs. You can pay more money annually for insurance to have better coverage, but that's going to reduce your cash available for other things. You can cut back on your insurance to have more free cash for other parts of your plan, but if a risk event occurs, how hurt are you going to be? Okay. Note also that your your insurance decisions will be influenced greatly once again by your life cycle phase. And this is mainly because your risk profile will change over time, both as you yourself get, older, and as you take on other obligations, both physical ones like a house and a car and property, and the ones that count, a spouse, children, things, people that you want to protect. Okay. The next part of a financial plan, this is the one that when most people hear financial planning, they think of this, and that's investment planning. But I want to point out that while investment planning is important, it's only one part. It's just one part. And prudent financial planning would usually say that you should hold off on your investment planning or on exercising your investment plans until you have cleared all your debt, gotten your liquidity under control, gotten your budget straight, and up that oh shit emergency fund that we've talked about before. Okay, but either way, definition-wise, investing is what allows you to use your savings. And here we go again. You have to be net cash flow positive or nothing else works, okay? But investing allows you to use your savings to accumulate wealth, to grow your asset base, or to chip away at your liabilities. But either way, investing allows you to accumulate wealth. And that wealth will either be for major expenditures or most likely so that when you decide to retire, you're not eating cat food, okay? So investing at its core is the long-term process where you take savings that come from your cash flow positive and you use those savings, you invest those savings to accumulate wealth. That wealth then would allow you to have either more expenditure later or more than likely retire. When we talk about investments, the primary vehicles in a personal finance discussion would include ones that you're aware of. Those are stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and real estate. And we'll cover each of these 4 investment classes in separate lectures later in the term. Okay. Once again, I hope you see the theme here. You're making decisions. Your decisions have trade-offs, and your decisions affect other parts of this integrated plan, okay, this lattice work of plan and cash flow. Your investment decisions include, number 1, how much of your funds to invest. Number 2, where to invest them. Number 3, what asset allocation you prefer. Again, asset allocation refers to the proportion of these different investment vehicles that you have. Actually, if you really want to be asset allocation, you would add a 5th vehicle, and that's your cash, right? So you have to make decisions on how much to invest, on where to invest, on what asset allocation you prefer, and critically, with the level of risk that you are comfortable with. Because another of the decisions or trade-offs in the investment area is that crucial risk-reward trade-off. For example, stocks will typically perform far better than cash. They're also far riskier, okay? So you're gonna have to make investment decisions, again, tied to your bigger plan on how much to invest. There's a trade-off because every dollar that you invest, you cannot use for immediate use. On where you're going to put it, there's a trade-off. On what your asset allocation is going to be, that's going to specify the trade-off. And critically, what level of risk you're going to be comfortable with. Because again, to repeat, because wealth accumulation requires decent returns, you need to invest, but there is a trade-off between risk and return. And balancing that trade-off and making the appropriate trade-off decision, as is shown in your asset allocation, is going to be a big decision. It's also going to be, as you can imagine, a decision that is going to be based in large part on 2 things. Number 1, on your own personal risk threshold. I mean, some of you guys are risk takers, some of you are more conservative. That's just how you are. You're going to have to invest tied to that. But it's also going to be tied to your life cycle. Because clearly the longer time you have before you're going to need those investments, the more risk you can take, because time has a way of flattening out risk, especially if you have a diversified portfolio. The closer you get to your retirement, for example, the less risk you want to have. Because the last thing you want to do is have all your money in the stock market 2 years before you're going to retire and the stock market takes a shit. Okay, so again, you're going to look at your own life cycle and your own personal risk tolerance and make those key investment decisions. The next component of a financial plan, retirement planning. Retirement planning is determining how much of your current income you will set aside for retirement, and critically tied to the stuff that we just covered, how to invest those funds. Retirement planning obviously ties into all the other components of the plan, but it's unique in that it's something that you start doing now, but you have to really be thinking ahead at that abstract future you, okay? Retirement planning is also unique in the value of time. Given the fact that, let's say you guys are early 20s and you don't want to retire till, let's say, mid 60s, you have like 45 years, let's say, 50 years, let's say, to retire, to plan it. I mean, think about that. That's more than 2 times the life that you've already lived. So it's a very abstract thing. But if you consider time and you consider future you can have a great retirement, okay? You do have to ask this question. Does current you love and respect and care about future you? Because if that's the case, if current you does love future you, then you need to start thinking about retirement planning now. Because again, time is a critical and almost magical component of retirement planning. Because of that, if you truly care about future you, you need to start your retirement planning today. And by that, I mean really today. Today. Not later, but today. And in an upcoming lecture on the time value of money, we will learn the magical beauty of compounded interest over time. The final part of a comprehensive financial plan is estate planning. This is the process of making, and I will be the first to tell you, very emotional, very difficult, very painful decisions on how your wealth and assets will be distributed either before or more than likely upon your death. Estate planning is where a lot of people who've gotten all the other components right stick their head in the sand, because dealing with death, talking about death, contemplating your own mortality is deeply unsettling and painful for many people. However, it's also the one that is really most tied to being an adult. Since I've gotten into the fiduciary stuff, and you look at cases and you're asked to be the trustee on people's estate plans, you really get a sense firsthand about the I don't want to say the goodness, because death sucks, but the goodness of having a good plan and how a good estate plan makes things for your survivors easier. And you also see how a bad plan is just brutal, or God forbid, no plan. It's painful to think about, but at the end of the day, if you do this correctly, if you do your estate planning correctly, the influence and the money and the love that you have for your family, the wealth that you've accumulated to take care of those that you care for, that can actually outlive you. When we do this actual lecture and we talk about it in more detail, I'm going to say to you, if you do your estate planning well, your money will actually outlive you. What does that mean? Well, your money has a life too. Good estate planning, your money can outlive you. And the beauty of that, it sounds creepy, but go with it. You can actually have an influence even after you're dead. It's painful, but you can have money set aside for your grandchildren, for your godchildren, to pay for their education. You can provide for charities that have mattered to you. All those different things can be done with a good estate plan. I will tell you, however, if you neglect this, if you estate plan incorrectly, or God forbid, don't do it, I'm going to probably guarantee you that you will make the life for your survivors hell. Because on top of grieving for you, you will have left them a pile of shit to have to untangle. And at least in the experience that I've had in my fiduciary world, there's a very good chance that you are going to implode your family after your death. That the survivors that you leave behind will go to war, bickering over things. That all those sacrifices that you're making starting today for that future you and for those that you love, that's going to become undone as your beneficiaries go to court and your hard-earned money is pocketed by estate and probate attorneys and by the legal system. Okay. Estate planning, it's a difficult one. It's because it means that you're gone or you're going to go. But at the same time, this is really the one that's most tied to being an adult. You do it well, and your influence can actually extend beyond your mortal human years. You do it poorly, and you're going to probably implode your family. So those, my friends, are the basic components of a financial plan. The next question is, how does financial planning affect your cash flow, and how do those separate components tie together? And what types of decisions will you need to make on a regular basis? So let's briefly cover that with a real quick little illustration, and then we'll wrap this lecture up. The components of your plan all affect your cash inflows and your cash outflows. So really, cash and cash inflow and outflow is the binder, is the glue in this comprehensive plan. Therefore, the components of your plan will ultimately affect the amount of cash you have available. And as you know, in personal finance, cash is king. If you take a look, let's expand that a bit for you, at this chart, and I'll give it to you, it's actually, you'll have this on your notes. You see that you have, it says your job, but ideally you have your job as well as all your other assets. So let's just say that you actually have your assets. And those assets generate income, and some of your income gets spent on all the products and services that you need to live, and hopefully you do that prudently. That's your budgeting plan, right? That's your budget. The leftover money becomes your cash. And if you notice, all of our different areas, liquidity and financing and retirement and estate and investing and insurance and risk mitigation, all of those are sources or uses of cash. The money that you have, the cash that you have after your income and your spending and your taxes, because you're spending to Uncle Sam, that money that you have left over, that is how you make decisions and allocations on your plan. So for example, you can put money in the bank or withdraw money out. Or you can put money into a savings account or take on credit card debt. That's a part of your liquidity plan. You know, you can take out loans to gain cash as part of a financing plan, although you have to pay that money back. That's an outflow of money. If you look at your risk, the cash that you have goes out to pay for insurance premiums. However, if you had an event that you had to help rebuild from, this insurance that you paid for could theoretically bring cash back to you. Your cash goes out in the form of long-term investments. Of course, if you do that right and allocate right, that money can come back to you at some time in the future in the form of dividends, for example, or capital gains when you sell an investment that is appreciated. And finally, you know, your retirement and estate planning. Your cash goes out to fund those future you accounts. Of course, one day when future you is old and gray and gravity's taking a toll, you'll have a big, big chunk here, and that'll come back to you in the form of retirement income to help live your best life that you've earned. Okay, so I want you to take a look at this thing. Let me clean it just so you can get one more look. And just really get a sense of the flow of money, the flow of cash into and out of different vehicles. And with that understood, you'll have a really good sense. And it's an ongoing process to learn how the parts of your plan tie together. But ultimately, they revolve around cash as a hub. Let's conclude this by taking a look, finally, at a couple of things. The sources of cash. Because if cash is king and your net cash flow determines what you can do, your sources of cash include working more hours, or for most of you who will be white-collar workers, earning more per hour. That's good career management, right? That's good professional growth. You can pull money from savings. You can obtain a loan. It's a financing and credit decision. You can cash in an insurance policy. You can sell some investments that you've bought, or you can pull funds from your retirement account. Each of these represents a source of cash that is tied to one of the components of your plan. That's how they come together. At the same time, these components have uses of cash. Cash goes out. Obviously, you purchase goods and services because you want to live and derive utility every day. That's your budget plan. You're going to put money into your savings and checking accounts. Now, this is a weird one because I know that you think of your checking account, your savings account as cash that you hold, and it is liquid. But if you really think about it, taking money and the money that you earn and putting it into these accounts is a use of cash because it's one among alternative uses. There's an opportunity cost also. It's a use of cash. So you can put cash into your checking or savings accounts. You can pay interest payments on a loan. You can pay off your loan. You can make insurance payments. You can invest new money or money in new investment assets to accumulate more wealth. You can put money toward your retirement account so that future you gets to eat steak and not cat food. Again, you have uses of cash, all of which represent cash outflows, all of which are tied to different components of your plan. Cash brings it all together, okay? Finally, I'll summarize this long lecture, and I thank you for sticking with me, but this is an important one because we're really setting a foundation and a blueprint for all the rest of the term. Good financial planning at its core requires knowledge. And it requires knowledge and familiarity with that knowledge so that you can fluidly move from ground level decisions, like day-to-day spending, day-to-day investing decisions, to higher level planning, and to see how the various parts of your plan are integrated and how the decisions related to one component affect the overall plan, and as a result, either help make or break that beautiful person that you're going to love and care for called future you. Okay? This has been a long one, my friends. Thanks for sticking with me. You now understand the basic components of a financial plan. You know them from a technical lens, and hopefully you're building your knowledge and fluidity and familiarity so you can see how they all interrelate together. Take care, and I'll see you next time.